Good afternoon, everyone.
I don't think it's loud. So.
If I could get everyone's attention, welcome. I want to call to order the May meeting of the Board of Early Education and Care. Welcome to everybody here. Today we will hear from members of the Residential and Placement Licensing Team. In advance of their presentation, I want to thank the members of the team who have stepped away from their work today to inform and educate the board about the work that you all do. The department has a large portfolio of work, including the Residential and Placement Licensing Team. It is important for the board here to have an understanding of the work you do each and every day, and we're appreciative of your time here today. In addition, the commissioner and team will then update the board on our continued journey to update our rate and reimbursement structure. And with that, I will hand it over to the secretary.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, all. Just a few brief comments. Since the last time that we met, the House Ways and Means released their FY24 budget, which includes many important early education initiatives, including $490 million for C3 grants. The revenue for those grants comes both from the general fund as well as a new online lottery. As I believe many of us know, the Senate is set to release their budget this afternoon. As a matter of fact, I got snippets of it right before I came over here, and we look forward to discussing their proposal with them. Also, want to just briefly note that the applications for the Department of Higher Ed's Early Childhood Educator Scholarship are now available. I have a link here, and it's very long, but I know that if you go to mass.edu and click financial aid, it'll bring you right to a landing place to learn more about that scholarship. EEC and Department of Higher Ed have been coordinating on this scholarship opportunity, and we want to make sure that as many eligible educators as possible apply. And then finally, this is Teacher Appreciation Week, and Friday is Child Care Provider Day. I just want to seize the moment and express my deep appreciation for all that early education educators do with and for their students and families. To be clear, there's no comparable gift we can offer you in return for the gift that you give children each day. This afternoon, I just want to say thank you for the work you do.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, we think every day is a good day to celebrate educators, but this week in particular, I'm very happy to have a day for our early educators to be called out as well. A couple of quick updates. We will update the board when we have had a chance to look at the Senate Ways and Means budget, which is, I think, coming out, as the Secretary said, right now, and we'll await final Senate action on that and then update you on the various proposals among the governor, the House, and the Senate. But it's so far been a really excellent budget year for the department, and we are incredibly grateful for the support from the administration as well as both branches in the legislature. So look forward to reporting on that at our next meeting, and certainly in between if we have more information. I want to do a quick personnel update. I'm very pleased today to introduce you to Jessie Murray, who's our new Chief Product Officer, and she is joining us from the Department of Family and Medical Leave. And in this role, I'm very excited to welcome Jessie, but I'm especially excited that EEC has its first ever Chief Product Officer, which will be really responsible for the user experience. So both our staff and our families, and early educators and programs. So I'm going to be responsible for making sure that our updated policies and procedures are reflected in the experience of all of our stakeholders interacting with the system and on our continued path to modernize how we do our business. So welcome, Jessie. We have a lot of work to do, and we're looking forward to all you're going to accomplish in that role. The most substantive update I have for you is around our regulations, and I wanted to just give a quick update on sort of the implementation for the Child Care Financial Assistance regs. So the team has been busy at work working on updated policies and procedures associated with those. We've had a working group of stakeholders from the early education and care community who interact with the Child Care Financial Assistance system, partnering with us on that work to make sure we're doing it in concert with them. Our intention right now, we had originally talked about a July 1st official effective date. And we're going to push that back a little bit and have a kind of a soft launch over the summer with a formal effective date of September 1st. This will allow us enough time to develop the training materials and engage with our stakeholders. As many of you are aware, our child care resource and referral services are out for bid right now with new contracts scheduled to start July 1st. And it was going to be very hard to train them all up by July 1st and also sign new contracts on July 1st. So this timeline will enable us to make sure that our new vendors are trained in the new policies and procedures. We do intend to do some soft launch and communication around changes and changes to some policies, in particular ones that we think are most important and beneficial for families, so that we can get to those as quickly as possible. But the official effective date that we're proposing will be September 1 for those regulations. And happy to entertain any questions about either of those. And also just thank you, Secretary, for the update on the scholarship program. You can also go to EEC's website to find out information about the scholarship as it's jointly administered. And it is open until August 1st, so we indeed hope that as many of you who are eligible will participate in that. And finally, our June board meeting will actually be here in Boston again, so we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. At this time, I'd like to open it up for public comment. I didn't see that anybody had signed in, but has anyone joined us that would like to offer public comment to the board? Not seeing any. I do want to recognize and acknowledge that the board has received public comment by email, and it has been distributed to the board prior to the start of the meeting for review. We have one item of routine business, the approval of the April minutes. Are there any additions, corrections, or edits to the minutes? If no, then I'll make a motion to approve. Can I get a second?
Second.
Maria, thank you, and I will call the roll. Secretary Tutwiler.
Yes.
Maura Siegel.
Yes.
Georgia Tanasoff.
Yes.
Linda Sager.
Yes.
Maria Moeller.
Yes.
Carolyn Kane.
Yes.
Jamela Lee.
Yes.
With that, the minutes of the April board meeting are approved, and I will hand it over to the commissioner to start our presentation.
Great. Well, I would like to invite up Andrew Rome, who's our Deputy Commissioner for Field Operations, along with Kelly Buckley and Tim Keene, who are supervisors on our residential and placement team. And extra special guests today are our three of our licensors from the residential and placement team. So I'd like to invite up Yvonne Adobo Piper, Carrie Murphy-McCall, and Tracy Medeiros. And you all can introduce yourselves as well when you present, so the board members know who is who. I'm very pleased today to kind of continue the path that the agency's been over the last several months of doing both a step back to make sure that all of us are on the same page around the different areas of work that the agency focuses on, and also to share with you plans for reforms that are upcoming. So it is not. I think this may actually be the first time that residential and placement work has been featured at the board meeting, possibly. And it is an incredibly essential part of the work that we do, serving some of the most vulnerable kids around the Commonwealth. And I'm really pleased to have the licensing team here and to share with you sort of an overview of what we do relative to our residential and placement programs, what's in the agency's portfolio, tell you a little bit about the services that are provided in those programs and who the kids are that are served. And then to kick off what is really officially a regulation reform process. And so important for the board to have a real sense of what the programs are, what our current relationship is to those programs as we enter into what will probably be a 6 to 12 month process of regulatory review. These regulations have not been meaningfully revised since 1995. Referenced in the regulations is, I think, two agencies ago, and talking with many of the residential staff over the last year, it's, in some ways the regulations, I think, are catching up with the practice in the field, but not having current regulations that reflect current work around positive youth development, around working with our LGBTQ youth, around a racial equity lens. A lot has changed since 1995, and the practice in our programs, and we want to make sure our licensing team has the best possible tools to be able to partner with those programs in providing these essential services. So really pleased to have the opportunity for you to meet this team and to hear about the work that we do. I'm going to hand over, I think, Andrew, so you can try. Yes, sure.
So welcome all. And we're going to just introduce ourselves, so I'll start at the far left.
Hello, my name is Kelly Buckley, and I am one of the supervisors in the residential and placement unit. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Hello, my name is Yvonne Adelpiper, and I'm a residential placement licensor out of the Worcester office. And I've been at the agency for maybe 6.5 years.
Carrie Murphy McCall. I'm also a residential and placement licensor. I sit in the Lawrence office. And I've been with the agency a really, really long time.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Medeiros, and I'm a licensor for the residential and placement unit out of the Taunton office. And I've been here almost 6 years, 5 years.
And Tim Keene, the other residential placement supervisor. Kelly and I have both been here 20 plus.
I wasn't going to
Years.
say that, but thank you Tim, for pointing that out. But notice how I glided over that. That's great.
And I'm Andrew Rome, Deputy Commissioner for Field Operations. I've been at EEC for just a little over 2 years, but I have over 31 years of state government time working at a different agency, DCF, for most of that time. So we're going to get into our residential and placement, otherwise known as RMP, is what we like to call it. It just makes it a little bit easier and quicker to say. These are programs, so residential programs are programs that provide both housing as well as clinical supports for youth. The youth can be anywhere from 0 to 18, even going to 21 with special needs. The majority, though, are latency age youth. These are children that have had usually trauma within their life, and because of that trauma, they have developed clinical needs and behavioral issues. So these programs will help them through that time. It can be two different types of programs. One is group care programs, and the other is our temporary shelter that we do licensing. As we proceed through the slides, we will delve more into the actual differences and ways that they may do their work. We also have placement agencies. Those are divided again into two different types of licensure. One is foster care placement, so temporary foster care for youth. And then we also have adoption agencies, both public and private. And those are those that give final permanency adoption as being one of those permanency goals to youth that are not able to go back to their family of origin. I'd also just like to, and I should have done this at the very beginning, I have to tell you, I am very proud of everyone at this table and the licensors that are not here. RMP folks do a fantastic job, and I am just very proud of them and thank them for coming today, although I may owe them, I think I owe a carrot cake at least for one to come today.
Well, thanks, Andrew. So just a quick overview. The residential and placement unit actually has 11 licensors in total, and then Tim and I, who we report directly to Andrew, who will be making a carrot cake, so we're happy to hear that. So there are two sets of regulations that we are responsible for making sure programs are in compliance with. It's the CMR 300 and the CMR 500 regs. Group care programs, they serve kids in residential settings for anywhere from 0 days to 3 years. It includes multiple types of care, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in more detail as we move through this presentation. There are 311 currently licensed programs across the state with a total licensed capacity of over 5,000 youth. For temporary shelter programs, that's a shorter stay, and really the difference between what a group care program and a shelter program, it really is the intentionality of placement. So for kids that enter group care, that's usually something that's been planned. It is, you always look for the least restrictive, so if they could not be in a foster home, then the referral source would pick some type of group care program. For shelter, it's less than 45 days. You can't exceed more than 45 days unless you would request a variance. And they're very targeted, specific, just to meet their basic needs. If they're, if it was a homeless situation, a care and protection, if they needed a hospital step-down program, they needed some assessment work, it's very short, but you wouldn't necessarily know. It could be in a setting in the community, it could be in an institution, it could be on a campus of many different programs, it could be a floor in a hospital, because it's a step down from a hospital program. So that just is to give you a little bit of, the question of what's the difference between a group care and shelter? It really is the intent of the placement and then the time frame that license would allow someone to stay there. And then we have the foster care placement agencies and the adoption agencies. So we have 56 currently licensed programs across the state, and we have 27 currently licensed programs for adoption across the state. I think adoption meaning permanent. It's all the agencies are working towards a permanent plan of adoption for kids. For foster care, they're 24 hours a day, just like our residential programs, up to 6 kids, but for programs who are serving more acute kids, it's probably only 2 kids perhaps in a home, or 4 at the most. And just to make note, the license capacity across the state, I just think it's important to note that because of some workforce and retention issues, the capacity across the state right now is probably much lower, although the license allows them perhaps to care for 10 kids. They're only probably caring for about 6 or 7. You have to have enough staff to care for the capacity that EEC would allow for, so they're running a little bit under that capacity right now. Okay. So this just gives a nice illustration and visual, breaks down the type of programs that would fall underneath group care, which is the longer-term care. So there's group homes, transition to independent living. That's older youth who may be aging out of the system, who are going to need to really work on some life skills. We have teen parent programs. Those are programs that children live with the parent at the program, and some of those can be newborns all the way up through latency age. We have our res ed schools. We have DYS programs that we license, and then the specialty programs such as eating disorder, fire setting, sex offender programs, they all would fall underneath that. And then for the temporary shelter, which is more short-term, we have the step down to hospitals, which they refer to as CBAT or ICBAT, and then DYS also runs shorter-term programs that kids, until they are committed or a plan for them has been developed, that's short-term. DYS, they're allowed up to 90 days, not the 45 days. That's the one difference. And we're going to talk a little bit more about these types of programs as we get further into the presentation. I think the licensors are going to talk a little bit about that. And then the types of for placement agency, which is the other type of license you could have, you either would get a foster care license or an adoption license. So for foster care, that's either contract, all of the foster care that we work with contract with the Commonwealth. For adoption agencies, it could be the Commonwealth's DCF, who also does foster care and adoption, or private agencies who do domestic and international adoptions. I have to say there's been a decrease over the years in international adoptions. Our larger programs that had international programs, Russia, the Eastern Bloc, China, they're closed, so a lot of programs have really decreased and focus in on certain services such as home studies, and contracting with DCF to help support them do their work. I think that's it. I'll pass it over to Andrew.
So as Kelly talked briefly and mentioned, there is as part of our res programs, there are also called res ed schools. And those programs have both the residential component as well as the educational piece. DESE, Department of Elementary Secondary Ed, oversees the educational piece. We see over the residential, but it is vital that we have an ongoing collaboration with DESE because it's the same youth. And in some cases, it may be similar staff who are working both in the educational piece and in the residential. So it is vital that we make sure that our lines of communication are always open and that we are talking back and forth to know if there's an issue going on, if the program is not meeting the needs of a particular youth or youth all over. And so we don't want to work in silos. So we do work very well and collaboratively. We have regular meetings with them. We have phone numbers where we talk to each other. When DESE is getting ready to go out and do their monitoring visits, we provide them with information such as our last visit, licensing history, et cetera. So they're fully aware of what is happening in the residential piece, again, because it's the same youth and sometimes it may be the same staff. There are approximately 146 of those programs. So out of that, about 47% of our residential programs are res ed programs. We also have a number of other partners. Now, EEC is not a funding source at all for any of these programs. We are solely the licensing source. But there are referral agencies. So those can be the Department of Mental Health, parents, guardians, and families. The LEAs, the local education agencies, will also make referrals to any of these programs. DCF makes referrals, as does DYS. And then you also have out-of-state education, which will also make referrals to these programs. Some of those same agencies, such as DCF, DYS, LEAs, they also fund these programs, as does medical insurance for like the CBATs and the ICBATs. So sometimes there's overlap, and again, we do a lot of collaboration with those agencies, especially DCF, to ensure that services are being provided to children and youth, and to ensure that they are being kept safe and getting the services that they do need.
Just before we turn it over to licensors, so I think it's important to note that as Andrew's saying, in the early education and care sphere, our relationship is sort of much broader, right? We license programs, we fund child care financial assistance, we have contracts with those programs, we do teacher certification, soon to do that again more. We set quality standards, we provide grants for physical facilities, we provide early childhood mental health consultation, we fund partnerships in the community around early education and care, we have a scholarship program for early educators. Our relationship to the residential programs is much different, right? We have primarily a regulatory relationship, although when you hear from the licensors, I think you'll recognize it's also very much a partnership on behalf of the kids and families that are served there. But the funding agencies are the ones who are often setting the treatment goals or the standards for services that are provided. So we have a sort of narrower stated, and formal role with the residential programs. So the collaboration with the other agencies who are either placing kids there or funding the programs or setting treatment goals is really an essential part of this work, but outside sort of the agency's purview. All right, I'm going to turn it over and hear a little bit from our licensing team about what it looks like on the ground.
So we just want to thank you for this opportunity to speak with you all today. It's been many years since we've been able to sit in not this room, but a different room with the board and share what we do. So we appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Tracy's going to be talking with us about foster care and adoption. Yvonne's going to be sharing about what it's like in our programs, not just for the youth, but also for the staff that work in our group care and temporary shelter programs. And I'll be talking about what we, the licensors, do to support our programs. It's important to note when I'm talking about programs today that I'm referring to our group care and temporary shelter programs. These are 24/7, 365-day-a-year programs. They don't close. They are open all the time. They were open during COVID. We actually operated emergency sites for children during those times. Kids that were COVID positive that couldn't remain in their program were moved to other units. It might be a house in a neighborhood. It could be an apartment in a multi-floor building, a floor of a hospital, or a more dorm-like setting where there's singles and doubles and triples. So just to give you an idea of sort of the different scope of what our programs can look like. And all of the youth in these programs, including foster care, they have emotional, behavioral, or developmental needs. Some, if not most of them, have limited parental involvement. So we're a voice for these kids in some ways. We're going in, we're talking with the youth, we're meeting with them, and really hearing about their experience while they're there. I would say, one of the largest things that the licensors do is conducting annual visits with our providers. And that's either a renewal, which is every 2 years, or a monitoring visit in those off years. Renewals are almost always announced visits, and monitoring could be unannounced. I personally love unannounced visits. I think you get a true sense of what's going on in a program. And we work really hard to establish collaborative, positive relationships with our folks. So that when we do walk into their program unannounced, it's not like a surprise gotcha moment, but we're really there to gather information and be able to share, just being another set of eyes in the building. And at the end of the day, we all have the same goals. We're all there to make sure that kids are safe and taken care of. That's, what the program's role is, and that's what our role is as the licensors. So at a renewal, we usually start the visit by meeting with the executive director and the administrative team and hearing about what's been going on, any updates, any changes. We gather information relative to the regulations while we're present in the building. We're interviewing staff, we're interviewing kids, we're meeting with different groups of folks there. We're reviewing lots and lots of records, resident records. We take a look at personnel, including background record checks, medication administration, communication, fire drills. We're always inspecting facilities. We're walking through each room of the building, kids' bedrooms, common areas, and making sure that they meet the regulations. And then conducting program observation, where we sit in the common areas with the kids and we talk with them and we talk with the staff and we see what's going on in the building. Once we've organized these findings, we share them with the executive team. We share the positive things that we've seen while we're there. We share any suggestions that we have for improvement, and then, of course, any non-compliances, and then work with the program to develop those compliance plans. Yearly monitoring is very similar, but it's more of a targeted visit. So we're really reviewing the last year since the last renewal, doing any follow-up to any investigations that have occurred during that time. And it always is another inspection of the facility and more observation of resident and staff interaction. And again, gather up all of that information, share it verbally with the program, and then follow up with a written report. Licensors always also conduct investigations. Our most serious go to our investigation unit, but licensors are always responsible for the monitoring of those reports and any enforcement that needs to come from those. I'm now going to turn it over to Yvonne to talk about what it's like for our programs.
Thank you. So like Harry said, I'm just going to sort of talk to you a little bit about what it's like, the role of our programs, what it's like for our staff and for our youth living in placement, what the structure of a milieu looks like. There are 3 shifts primarily. There's the overnight, which is generally about 11 to 7. Overnight staff come in 11, they leave at 7. There's a second shift, 11 to 7, 7 to 3 would be the morning shift, and then 3 to 11 is the evening shift. What I like to say, where it all goes down, because that is, that's a difficult time, right? That after school time, before bedtime, hygiene, it could be a very difficult time. So the overnights, essentially, they are the ones who are waking the kids up for school, right? Say it's a weekday. The overnights are, a lot of the kids are getting up at different times. Some kids have to get up as early as 5 in the morning to prepare for school. They might go to school an hour out from where they're living. Some kids are going to school on campus, so they might get up an hour or 2 later. So staff are getting kids up, as you know, especially teenagers. It's not an easy task, right? So you're waking these kids up. They have to shower. Some shower in the morning. They have to get their meds. They eat breakfast. And then, some of the staff, the 7 to 3 staff will come in generally around this time. And there's sort of this warm, like, handover, right? They will do sort of a shift change to talk about if anything happened on the overnight. A lot of our programs are, as you know, our youth have a lot of trauma. And so they struggle around bedtime, right? A lot of bad things were happening to them at night around bedtime. So oftentimes an overnight will come in and kids are still up. They maybe, want a staff to sit in front of their door, sing them a song, just talk to them about what's going on, right? Could be a grandmother's in the hospital, they haven't had a visitation with their siblings, just things that are on their mind. So sometimes kids are up pretty late. So now that the 7 to 3 have come in, they get sort of, the kids off to school. A good day is all kids are in school successfully. There are no kids back, whether that may be due to a suspension, due to refusing to go, or perhaps just not feeling well, right? They're homesick. So 7 to 3, a lot of appointments are happening around that time. Maybe there's a caseworker or just usually one staff member who's at the program who is taking a kid to, for a dental appointment or a physical, generally just appointments. The second shift, 3 to 11 shift, staff usually come in about 2:45. They'll sort of do a shift change, talk to the first shift, about anything that's gone on. That could be just discussions around, Youth A had a treatment team meeting or, had a couple appointments. All kids were in school successfully. Maybe someone got sent home. But I don't know. There's this exchange of communication around how the youth days went and what's happening for that upcoming shift, the 3 to 11. So the 3 to 11 shift, kids are coming home from school around this time. Some kids are getting picked up. Like I said, some kids attend school on campus. So you have staff walking them back to the unit, to the residence. You have kids getting dropped off of school buses. So staff, at this point, you have some staff who are meeting kids at the school bus, going to pick kids up from school. Some staff are taking kids on appointments as well. Some kids have individual therapy around this time, right? So usually about between 3 and 4 o'clock. For those kids who are just returning back to the residence, it's primarily snack time. They have a snack. They have time to just kind of settle in and, just kind of recharge from the day. Kids often want to make phone calls as soon as they get back, right? It's a lot going on. So if you maybe have 10, 12 kids, they all have different needs. I need to make a phone call. I want to call, my mom starts work at, 5, so I have to call her right now. Another kid might be meeting with, a DCF worker. Another kid, there's therapy, individual therapy happening. A lot of our kids are involved in extracurricular activities in the community. So some kids have a soccer game, basketball game, right? So now you have one staff who's taking kids, who are taking some of the kids on the unit to watch another youth, soccer game. There's group therapy as well that happens during second shift. So the clinical staff, along with our direct care staff, who are often supporting the clinicians as like co-facilitators, are running groups, psychoeducational groups. That could be a substance abuse group, that could be an anger management, a DBT. There's some sort of group happening for about 45 minutes, right before dinner, about 4, from 4 to 4:15. There's a group happening. After group, the kids will generally head back to their rooms for what's called like settling time. And while all this is happening, you could have a kid in the timeout room because they were triggered by the group. They were triggered by something that came up in the group or something another youth said. A lot of the kids don't like groups, so sometimes they're just, they'll do something to maybe get tossed out because they don't want to attend group. Just, sometimes age-appropriate behavior, although it is part of their treatment. So and then, so during this sort of, groups over, they're in their rooms, settling. Some kids are doing chores, while other kids might be preparing for dinner. A lot of our programs like to sort of split them up. You know, if there's 15 kids, they'll split them up by wings, just so there's not as much sort of stimulation in the dining room, you know, just to kind of keep it a bit small. A lot of our programs have cooks, but some don't. So, you know, in our programs, our kids are learning how to cook. They're learning how to measure food out. They're learning how to properly thaw out frozen food. There's a lot of opportunity during normal sort of programming for our staff to be able to instill just life skills. And, you know, the programs try to do it in a way where the kids don't feel like they're in another group, or it's like they're, you know, they're being taught, you know, something. It sort of needs to be done in a way that's very natural and organic. So that's something that our programs do. So the kids will have dinner. After dinner, generally about 6 o'clock, is hygiene time, right? Kids are preparing to sort of not really wind down, but they're showering. They're, you know, preparing perhaps for an activity off grounds. It could be the movies, it could be skating, could be an activity that's happening on grounds. These days it's video games. But, you know, if we could sort of figure out a way to get creative with the video games, our providers are really good with that. Having sort of maybe kids team up, you know, 45 minutes. When I was in programs, you know, our games were like Jeopardy, learning games, but, and then, you know, the winning team would perhaps get like a gift card, but now it is video games. Or, you know, outside games, basketball, you know, tennis, something like that. And around this time, it's probably about 7 o'clock, there's usually an optional activity, and then there's like a mandatory activity, because we, of course, if it's all optional, the kids would just opt to stay in their room and play video games or play video games independently. So in an effort to obviously teach them how to, like, you know, how to interact with their peers, even those peers that perhaps annoy them, right? How do you interact with people that are different from you, have different views from you, team building. So, yeah, so there's the optional, and then there's, you know, a mandatory activity. After activity, there's generally about, like, meds. Kids are getting medication around this time, 8 o'clock, and starting to wind down. So depending on the age of the program, some kids' bedtime's 8:30, some are 9:30, some are 10, because they're preparing for school the following morning. And then the weekends are a bit more lax. You know, they don't have to get up as early, so they can sleep in a little bit later. A lot of our programs on the weekends, they're almost always trying to schedule some sort of off-ground activity for the kids to get them out. It's really hard to get kids just outside to be active, because, you know, the other thing is, like, well, what are we going to do? They always ask. So what are we supposed to do out here at this park? You know, they're just sort of standing there. Bored. So, yeah, bored. And so our programs...
They're like every other teenager.
They are completely, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, they're not as creative these days. But, you know, the idea is to get them involved in things that, as a staff, they're interested in. So a lot of our programs, if there's a staff member who really enjoys playing the guitar, that staff member will have a guitar group and run a guitar group. We have staff who love running. They'll have a jogging group on the weekends, right, for kids who enjoy that or just want to participate in that. Hiking, whatever it is. You know, I think it's important to sort of to mention that the staff in the programs they wear so many hats. They essentially, you're the youth's parent, teacher, counselor. You know, every day is so different. Every minute in a program, they say, like, literally every second is very different, right? You have one kid over here who they're celebrating a birthday for the first time, and it's the program for the first time that has purchased a cake for this 15-year-old. They've never had a cake before. They've never been celebrated. They've never had people sing happy birthday and ask, what do you want, right? So for some kids, it feels very uncomfortable because that's just the first time that's happened. But it's an amazing feeling, and to know that you can sort of be etched, right, in this young person's mind for something that I think, you know, a lot of people take for granted, right? I mean, we have adults who have, like, they celebrate their birthday for a whole month, right? They're like, it's still my birthday, right?
Can you talk just, because we need to move on,
sure.
but just briefly about the role of parents when there is a parent involved or when we're working towards reunification? So what's the interaction with the family and for kids in programs?
Sure.
And then we'll turn to Tracy. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so anytime there's a parent involved, so there are quarterly treatment team meetings that, you know, the parents attend, clinician and a liaison from the school, you know, a staff member. And that's essentially where they talk about their treatment goals, discuss, you know, whether the goal has changed, right? If the goal is to reunification with family to go home, how are home passes going? You know, we want to know how can we support you, right? Same thing in family therapy, right? The clinicians work with the family members as well, and not just the parent, it's the entire family, right? The extended, the grandparents, the siblings, everyone has to be involved in the process, and we want to know how can we support you in the program, because the program really is the extension, right, of that the youth's home. So when they're in the program and when they're at home, we want to make sure that the rules apply the same. So, you know, you have to be very creative. And so if the parent says, you know, we're really struggling with, you know, Jonathan, you know, eating cupcakes at 10 at night or wanting to eat really late. And so you know, we'll try to curb, you know, that use, like, you know, nutrition plan in the program so that when they go home, there's some continuity there. Or how late they stay up, or homework time, right? Some parents, you know, want their kids doing homework even when school's not in session, right? They want to just sort of keep this structure. So even during the summer, there's an hour or 30 minutes of homework time, right? And we can't, you know, so some of the programs might say, well, we could incorporate 30 minutes of that. So the programs do a really good job of trying to have the parents' voice included in everything that they do.
So it's really a partnership around, especially
has to be,
if the
yeah.
plan is
Absolutely.
to go home. So
Yeah.
to support that.
Even if it
success.
isn't, I think, you know, sometimes parents recognize that they're not able to care for their child in the way that they would want to. And so, but their voice still matters as well, you know, and so we want to make sure that the providers do a great job making sure that their voice is heard and including them in all decisions, even if it's an individual plan that the program is implementing for a youth. They want feedback from the parent.
Great, thank you. Tracy?
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. So as it's been mentioned, we license foster care and adoption agencies. And it's important to note that we license the agency and not the families that are providing this type of care, whether it's adoptive families or foster families. Our regulations require that foster care agencies and adoption agencies are recruiting, training, and preparing families to provide this type of work. And that is done through a pretty extensive home study process. And during that time, the family is being assessed to determine what is the most appropriate placement for them and their family. There may be times that DCF may also contract with our licensed agencies to provide care in the family or to provide a home study. Once a placement is identified in the home, it is also the responsibility of the agency to ensure that there's services in place in the family and that there's case management, there's supports to foster parents, support to adoptive parents, support to foster children. The regulations for foster care and adoption are very similar. Adoption takes it a step further with work with permanency and finding that lifelong connection for a child in an adoptive placement. They're also working with the family to ensure a good match and to see the family through the finalization process legally. They are also on a 2-year licensing cycle. It's the same study essentially that Carrie spoke about. And I think that the biggest challenge we're seeing right now is the recruitment and the retention of foster parents. There is so many children in need of foster care and not enough families. So With that said,
And the relationship between those two things is you would like to have kids in the least restrictive setting, as Kelly spoke about. So if a child can be in a home-based setting through foster care, that's the ideal, especially for very young kids. But often when that's not the option, then we would look at residential or for treatment purposes too, so. All right, thank you all so much. We're going to talk a little bit about the reg reform framework. So I think I was here two or 3 weeks, and I did some regional visits in the offices, and I think it was Yvonne who shared how long it had been since the regulations had been revised. And part of the challenge with that is that when they're out at the programs and saying, this is what we need to be doing, Yvonne described it as a negotiation with the program, because the program would be like, show me where it says we should do that. And they know clearly that what needs to happen and what the services and the programs and it should look like in the program. And so finally we're here talking with all of you about how we will be approaching kind of a regulatory reform in this area. So Tim.
Great segue, thank you very much. Yes, I'll start off specifically talking about the residential regulations that we're looking to work on. Our current state, as you can probably glean, I mean, 1995 was quite a while ago. Most of us probably in front here might remember. I'm not sure on the back, but there wasn't a lot of texting. There was not a lot of Instagram access. There was less access in our programs for staff and kids to kind of divert their attention from, number one, why the youth were in these programs to be supportive, but also why the staff were there to try and help be fully attentive to our kids. So just kind of keep that in mind as we read these regs. Great point, Commissioner, about the regulations are currently built, in a time when programs were very, very compartmentalized. There wasn't ever really enough foster homes, Tracy, I think to your point, but time was a little bit better in that we had youth that were able to go to foster care, for the most part, had that opportunity. Likewise, for kids that had the ability to still function in the community, they would go to a group home and be able to still attend their regular school. And beyond that is Res Ed. We certainly had a great deal of Res Ed programming back then, but that would just be this fully inclusive, going to a campus, oftentimes, as folks mentioned, could be great distances from the actual family itself, so that makes permanency very difficult to try and continue to foster. But the levels of care were very defined in what was happening in those programs. I think it was a little bit, I don't want to say easier, but more measurable to make sure you could have an impact. So the regulations are built, on the same foundation that we'll move forward on, I think. And, they're 24 hours care, of course, but all of the programs need to be safe. It needs to be staffed appropriately. They have to have good structure, but just physically be in a place where it's safe for youth and staff to both work and reside in. It's meant to address children's short-term plans as well as long-term. We don't have very clearly defined programming where we dictate in these regulations to people. You can work with 6 to 8-year-olds or 6 to 12-year-old latency versus kind of 12 to 12 and beyond 18 or 18 to 22 with youth with special needs. We do go up till folks' 22nd birthday. And that's mostly Res Ed specific programming. But what we do rely on is these original pieces of regulation that speak to making sure that it's least intrusive to the resident. It should be the least restrictive. You shouldn't have youth in a Res Ed that might be able to function in a group home or in the community. But also just their ability to have safe, comfortable space and a sense of community. Some of our programs, you may see a license that says 8 to 22, and folks might be like, this is a 10-bed home. You have 8-year-olds with 18, 19-year-olds. The regs are built in a way that we need to do exactly what Yvonne and these guys do, work collaboratively with programs and work as a partner and say, you're not going to do that, right? This is how we're going to be structuring your program. So what they do need is flexibility around the referral source. And again, as the commissioner mentioned, we don't have a direct tie to that, but we sit at the table with referral sources on a regular basis. So we know that DCF isn't going to start sending 17 and 18-year-olds when they already know they have 3 or 4 latency age kids in a program. So just to allay people's fears, if they look at some of our licenses and see a wide range of ages spoken to, there's a lot of work done individually with programs to make sure that they have good groupings of youth that are in a community of kids that are in their same, as well as experiencing the similar needs that the residents have, or similar trauma as well. Thank you. So, as mentioned multiple times, the last time we really hit these regs were in 1995. There's such a thing called a ComLog, which I think all of our licenses have stopped making programs purchase because they're super expensive, and they're basically for this level of communication that Yvonne spoke about. Like, I mean, having to be on the first shift and communicating to the second shift on the 10 kids that we had, in our requirements are making sure you tell the next person in everything about this child's day, like what happened, what you did, what interventions occurred, what the next meetings are going to be. So there's a great deal of communication that is now, our programs are, and contracts speak to this as well, very advanced as far as being able to do a lot of things electronically between staff that are currently working. Back in the day, maybe, Yvonne, probably not for you, but there were beepers, right? There were pagers. And a staff member who is in potentially a full-blown restraint, because unfortunately that's the reality of our world, is some of our programs have kids that need physical intervention. Someone needs to try to steal away, grab a regular phone, and beep somebody, and that person will call back. And now a lot of that stuff, thankfully, there's much more direct access to support, I think, with programs. But again, with the electronic access, it's also created a great deal more risk for our programs as far as staff being able to take pictures in programs, or kids being able to take pictures of themselves and send them. We have a wide myriad of residents in our programs that causes a direct risk for, for sure. But one of our last major revisions was around a collaboration with other sister agencies, and that was to really impact the restraint piece of this, the actual behavior management of youth. And our regulations used to say behavior management, and I didn't, quite frankly, really understand that connotation until folks really around us, DMH, DCF, and other folks really said management just has this connotation to it that you're managing, a child's behavior versus supporting. So I think we were able to look at those regulations. Number one, the primary concern was to remove dangerous restraints. Prone restraint from the Commonwealth was still something that was very available to folks. Chemical restraints, which were something that you'd need to get doctor approval for in some of our very acute populations, and mechanical restraints, which is something that, as you can imagine, we license Department of Youth Services. There is a need at times for them to be able to, for court back and forth and otherwise, continue to use those devices. But that move at that time was very profound in that DCF thankfully moved forward, and it's been about a decade worth of time that they've spent working on trauma-informed care and really getting programs to realize you've got to get away from a point and level system that says basically if you've done something good, here's your reward. If you haven't, here's your consequence. Now we're really trying to, and it's from an agency buy-in. Every one of these agencies had to buy into having a trauma-informed environment, which basically meant we're not looking to say what's wrong with this child. It's more what's happened to this child. And staff alike also come to these jobs, unfortunately sometimes, as we all do, with our own experiences with trauma. So the actual regulations that we had, thankfully, that piece of it has come with the times, so to speak, and we've worked towards behavioral support. We're no longer still very specific in that population and driving this point level system, but the rest of our regulations could really come forward in a lot of different areas.
I think it's a really good example of, like, if it was the state of the art in 1995 to do prone restraint, and what we've understood about positive youth development and the re-traumatizing of kids who've been traumatized in programs. And so I think what we're trying to do is bring sort of the rest of the circle into the rest of the regs. Right.
Exactly, yeah, and I think one of the other important pieces to note is, again, around parent voice, parent and youth voice. We do interview youth. It's a vital piece of our work. We observe. We certainly have environments that have youth that have no ability to communicate with you really whatsoever, either due to their profound disabilities. A lot of programs also could have nonverbal, non-communicative youth, that we really rely upon a lot of different things, certainly the staff, but needing the parent engagement, needing the referral source, and needing the observation of the environment to make sure it's truly safe for our residents. Well, that kind of brings us to the place of our current conversation. Our team itself has been for years collecting notes on what citation they would like to add.
Waiting for
But-
the day.
But more specifically, thankfully, also ones that we can eliminate. So there's currently a section of our regulations, for example, that are shelter homes. Kelly and folks talked about temporary shelter earlier, and oftentimes it confuses people when they're trying to get into doing this work, what they're applying for and what that actually means. A shelter home was essentially a model that was, you'd kind of a house parent model for folks that might know what that is, but you'd have staff come and stay and live in the program on the overnights. That's no longer kind of a purchased method within the Commonwealth and hasn't been for quite a while. So situations like that, we're kind of updating our regulations to make sure they currently speak to the programming that is purchased in the Commonwealth. Certainly looking to eliminate, again, regulations such as that, and also streamlining. We have many areas. When 2015 came around, we added a lot of training and ongoing training there. So there's some training language spoken to over here, and then we have an introductory section that says prior to anybody being able to work with youth, they need to have X amount of training. So I think that just an alignment, streamlining a lot of that so that folks don't have to look in many different areas to make sure that they're complying with the regulations that we've set forth.
Regs are complicated as it is, so, and I think we're looking to do this with the placement regs too, right? If we can make them easy to understand and consume, then easier to follow and monitor.
Great point, yes. And
Yeah.
yeah, and minimize financial impact is obviously, as we mentioned, we don't have control of that, but we need to be mindful of it. We can't just go out and say, oh, everybody now needs to have an associate's degree. So we work collaboratively with our funding agencies to make sure that we're not going to be putting forth something that's not attainable and also not, helpful programming.
So for our placement agencies, we actually updated that most recently in 2018. It was an extensive years. We contracted with Evan B. Donaldson and had a lot of consultation from stakeholders and provider groups and other consultants. It was quite the process, and I think we really did a great job. But since we are looking at all regs, we took another look at the placement regs, and as Commissioner, I think you mentioned, one of the biggest things, the only thing that we were a little bit disappointed the last time around that we didn't get to do was how you structured the reading. I know it sounds like not a big thing, but for folks who are maybe just a foster care agency, they'd have to read through requirements of adoption or vice versa if you were just an adoption agency. So we really looked and streamlined in a way that's easy reading, and if someone new was coming in, it would be real easy to see exactly what they needed. And I think using this platform for review, we're going to get provider input, because since it was only 2018, love to hear from the providers, and we're going to be doing that to say, how did we do? Did we hit the mark? Now you've been working with these regs for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. Did we miss something? What else do you think we could do to make it better? So we're really looking forward to meeting with the providers to kind of hear exactly what else they think we need to do, but not as many changes, because we just did that. When we come back to present on the changes, as you'll probably hear from residential from 1995, it's not quite the gap. So we're looking forward to that.
So the real exciting part for me is the engagement that we're planning. So the licensing team has been working on this for a number of years, and we've done a lot of work with the licensing team. We also need to engage other state agencies, as you saw from previous slides. There's a number of agencies that intersect with us and interact with these programs. So we're looking forward to working with DESE, with DCF, DYS, et cetera, and making sure that what we're doing is facilitating better programs for youth and families, and making sure that we don't go the opposite way, which is create a system where the services become harder to get. And so we're looking forward to that. We will have, we're looking to engage with our partners in the field. So our RMP programs, as well as our placement agencies. I was hoping that Friday we were going to have our first work group. We've invited about eight to nine residential providers to come together to work with us to say, here's some suggestions. Does this work? Does this facilitate what you're actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis? One of the things that we have heard from our residential providers is the acuity of the youth has increased. So we need to make sure that this is all supporting the youth and the programs, again, to ensure safety. We will have that meeting very shortly with them, and then bring it to the wider community as well. And then, of course, there's the open comment period that we will have after we bring it to the board and ask for your permission to bring it out for open comment. So this is only the first of a couple of meetings, many meetings that we will be having with you. So our next steps. So starting in the spring, which we are here, and fortunately the weather is showing us that we really are in spring of 2023, we will start engaging with both the internal, so as I said, we've started with the RMP licensors, but we will also start working more closely with DESE, DCF. Both of them I've had some conversations with. They're aware that these changes are coming and that we want their input and want to hear from them. And we will start that work group. In the summer, we are looking forward to starting to have feedback sessions. That really does include the youth and the parents. We want to hear from families. Are these programs also meeting your needs to ensure that what we are doing, again, facilitates the relationship between parents and youth so that where it's possible for youth to go home, they actually will be able to, and that these programs will actually work in conjunction with the family. So is that working? We'll gather that feedback, and then in the fall, we're going to take all the feedback that we get from the programs, from the families, from the youth, and start working on the regulations for our initial recommendation to bring to the board here. In the winter, we would be looking for, if the board hopefully approves us going forward, we'll do the open public comment. We will gather all of that. I think we'll have some sessions as well to have the public come forward to us, so it won't just be all writing, but actually meet with people, engage with them, have some facilitated conversations about it, and then take all of that, and then take that input, put it into the regulations, and then hopefully in the spring, we will come back to the board and ask that these regulations can be promulgated. So for me, this is like real exciting.
I want to thank the team so much. I think, we wanted to start with a baseline knowledge of what the work is and sort of what it looks like on the ground every day, and the framework for the regulatory revisions that we're going to be undertaking. And they'll be back to share with you sort of the feedback and our path forward. I can hear the childcare folks at home, group, school age, and family childcare, like, when's our turn? And I just want to assure everyone, we are also going to get to the group and school age and family childcare, and many of the principles that we've been using, both for childcare financial assistance and now in the RMP regs, will also apply when we get to dusting off and moving forward with revisions there. So I want to thank you for your work every day. It came very clear how much you care about the kids in the programs and how deeply connected you are to the staff and to helping support the program succeed. I know they're struggling with a lot of the same things all of our programs are. Open it up for questions to the board.
Linda.
So, Commissioner, you mentioned that as part of the regulations, we don't set the quality standards. But is there any sense that we should or can do that to have more uniformity, to really think about what the deficits are in our programs? Could that be part of our mandate or not?
I mean, so I should probably correct myself and say that, and this is true in group and school age and family childcare too, that we have among the highest licensing standards, and certainly in residential programs, the standards do set, a standard for what we want care to look like, how we want staff to interact. Sure. So there is absolutely a quality aspect to the regulations.
Right. And so I'm just talking about more specific, perhaps, quality standards, about prevention programs, other services we want to provide. That's a given. I understand that our regulations
Set a standard of care for,
set a certain
absolutely.
standard of care. But I guess my question is it appropriate to think about looking at, in a more detailed way about services we provide and what we expect from our programs?
So I think if you go back to the slide about referral and who pays, et cetera, that's really where the standards come in. So for example, when DCF does their congregate purchase,
Right.
they put in very specific standards regarding the services that they need
Right.
in the programs. So I think that's where you get the majority of the quality.
Right.
I don't think that we would want to step in and say, okay, we want programs to do X, because that may not be what DCF, DYS, DMH need. So I think you get the quality there. I think there are parts of that which we do. So for example, in placement agencies, there is a requirement as to the type of degree and the background for individuals that are working with birth families to have. So you see some of that. In RMP, we do require, or in residential, we do have certain requirements regarding training, what kind of training, restraint training, things, we do have requirements in terms of when youth come in, what we still call the service plan, to make sure that the programs are doing actual work, and that it's written down and that there are specific goals. So there is a certain threshold that I think we do the quality, but the bigger picture of quality, I think, comes from the referring sources that have the contracts and are paying for it based on what the needs are for that agency and the youth that they're serving.
Yeah, so I guess I'm thinking of it from the point of view of the agency, like DCF, which is the one I know. Would it help DCF, if we became more involved in that? Or is that not our place?
Well, as long as it wasn't in conflict, as Andrew was
Right.
saying, like DCF is the referral, but the purchaser of the services. So they're
Right.
tracking the expectations for child outcomes and length of stay and a lot of the measures that like we might in our childcare world, where we're the purchaser, we're also the regulator and, have a broader. It's complicated. I mean, I don't think there's a bright line between what these guys are doing in the programs to help make sure that the programs have what they need to keep kids safe and are getting the treatment that they need and are warm handoffs and are getting the educational attainment they need, and the purchasers' services who are sort of placing the kids there and acting in loco parentis, as you know,
Right.
in many cases for those families. So, I mean, for those kids. So it's not a bright line, but I think, we want to make sure not to step too far over into what the other agencies'
Right,
expectations are for the programs.
I have a question that's it's somewhat related, is, do we know the history of how this became bifurcated in terms of, like, why is EEC the licensor for all these various programs? Why doesn't DESE license residential school programs? Why doesn't DCF license its congregate care programs? Like, how did this all evolve that EEC became the place that licenses programs?
Well, I mean, I was here when the agency was created, and Kelly and Tim also it was a discussion at the time that EEC was created about where, it's not a traditional or early education and care in the sense that I think most of us think about what's at the
Yeah, I'm not
agency.
suggesting it change
Yeah.
because I know that's like a huge issue,
Yeah.
but I just was sort of wondering because it does go back to the quality piece, is the payer, right? And the person that's procuring whatever type of service it is should be responsible for the oversight of the quality, because they're contracting for that, right? And so it's almost like EEC has been given more of what I see as the health and safety piece to make sure that the facility is sound and that the waters can't be too hot, and, if there's diaper changing, that there's all this hygiene stuff. But I'm just curious because, to be honest with you, I know that EEC is the licensor for residential school programs because I interact a lot with that, and I certainly interact a lot with DCF on congregate care. But I have to tell you, when I saw the other partners, I had no idea that it was that broad. And I guess I was just wondering, like,
Yeah, I mean, I think what I recall about the conversation, and Kelly and Tim can certainly, that Our predecessor agency, the Office of Child Care Services, was a regulating agency primarily. And they did do child care subsidies, but I think the expertise of the regulation had been established with that agency. And so when most of the programs came over, the decision was to keep that sort of regulatory function. And, you know, we have the support for our child care and group school age licensing, whether it's legal support, staffing support, so that, you know.
Yeah, I just didn't know,
building
was
that-
it
building that-
decided to centralize licensing? Do you know what I mean?
Or it
keep
was-
it to one
It was
agency rather than?
already together, and I
Oh.
think the decision was
Right.
not to pull it apart.
Oh, okay.
And
at
that
the
was,
time.
yes, and that was back at OFC, started out and they were a child advocacy group. So if a parent needed help, OFC was the place to go. And then it was decided for all regulations to be put under OFC at the time so that there was no conflict. So you had one person, and all we focused in on were the regulations, and we didn't have to think about other aspects, the money piece, the capacity, although we partner on that and we never make decisions in a silo. It kept kind of the line clear, so all licensing went under it, us, childcare. But that was like, once again, Tim, I'm not gonna date myself, but it was
I'm remembering back to like a
OFC.
NARA conference, the National Registry, you know, the regulatory body, and they kind of used our model almost as a standard to say this is good because it's a separation.
Right.
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
not to
between that,
suggest that
but-
you guys aren't doing a fantastic job, but it does, you know, I always ask the sort of obvious question, which is why is EEC the one doing this when I see all these other
No one is,
agencies?
yep.
And that came up with the recent issue too of the new programming that needs to be regulated as well. So, I mean, it's been,
And where that belongs, right?
yeah.
Right. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's both a historical
Yeah.
and present day opportunity. So, you know, it doesn't always, part of why I think we wanted to make sure we were sharing it with the board as we go into the regulatory process is that it's not a, you know, it feels like sometimes it falls a little bit outside what you might consider the mission, but it is an essential part of the work of the agency and the work, obviously, these folks are doing to, you know, think about the health and safety of some of our most vulnerable residents. So and that'll probably be a question that's asked for over time. Yes, is my.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just never of the mindset that we do that, because that's the way we always did it. And it's like, okay, but is that the way we should do it? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Comments or questions from additional members?
I just want to thank you for building our awareness and knowledge and for all of your work. In the spirit of awareness building, Tracy, you mentioned a challenge of recruiting and retention of foster families. First, is that in our domain to do that recruitment and retention work? And then if the answer is yes, let's talk about it, but if it's.
No, so we
okay.
license the agencies, and the agencies are responsible to recruit and train and prepare
Uh-huh.
the families, as I had mentioned. So I think that it's a difficult time right now for a lot of families, and I think becoming a foster parent is an additional ask and not something that every family can take on right now. And we're seeing a lot of families retiring post-pandemic after being home and returning back to the workforce. So it's the responsibility of the agencies.
What it made me wonder, but tell me again if this, so we've been talking about doing marketing and awareness building in the domain of family childcare and encouraging that as a, you know, so I just wondered,
Yes.
is that in our domain to do more of like awareness building, that it's an opportunity? I mean, that takes resources.
It's a great question, because we really need help at DCF, so.
Uh-huh. Or is that a DCF, or, anyway?
I mean,
that's-
Has
DCF is,
traditionally been,
yes,
Right.
which doesn't mean we
Traditionally.
couldn't also do a
But I
become
do
family
want-
childcare and foster, right?
Yeah, but what I do want to say is that part of, we meet regularly with DCF, and the federal government has given some guidance in terms of kinship homes and how you oversee those homes. And so we've worked very much with DCF to, I don't want to say loosen, but to modify some of our regulations and requirements to promote the kinship placement. For example, most foster homes, 50 square feet per child. In kinship, we've given waivers to DCF and looking at how better to do that of 35 square feet. so that they can continue to work towards putting children that cannot be with their family of origin, to put them in a kinship placement, which we know is a much better place than not. So there are things that we are doing with the agencies to try to support them in terms of their efforts of recruiting foster homes.
Good question.
Other comments or questions from the board?
We need help.
So Tim, Andrew, Tracy, Carrie, Yvonne, and Kelly, thank you. Just two quick observations. Number one, Commissioner, I appreciate the consistent theme here of just modernizing the way that we do our work and lifting up the regulations to meet the standards. And it sounds like the core of it is to make sure that children and families are at the center of any regulatory changes that we make. So that is exciting and promising. And just, I think it's important, I appreciate the education that you've shared with us today, because I think we take for granted the breadth of work that is in the portfolio of this department and the oversight responsibility of this department. And so you've brought great awareness to us today about the importance. And, you know, to some of the questions, I love public comment, because a lot of the things that I think we're talking about to folks listening, like this is a phase where we can add that voice to this process to see, you know, are we doing it right, and can we change things, and how do we, this is such an, I've never seen something more intergovernmental. When I look at that bubble chart there that you referenced, like,
good thing, right?
it seems very complex. But even throughout this process, you know, I would encourage people to add their voice about ways that we can continue to drive quality, because I think and health and safety. And so if that's our role in it, then we got to do it right. And so I appreciate the thoughtfulness in bringing forward the need for this change as well.
I just have one more question.
Yeah.
So, we have capacity issues for our, well, we have capacity issues in a lot of places, but particularly I'm thinking of our special education residential schools. Is there a way to encourage or regulate to say that, you know, we don't take out of state until we meet the needs of the in-state with regard to, I only bring that up because others, we lose a lot of seats to out-of-state placements, and we don't have enough for our own, that's all. Something to think about.
Okay.
Great. And I do want to acknowledge, and I didn't do this earlier, but Board Member Ruiz is on the phone as well. So.
And I'm not sure, Nikki, did you have a question or comment?
You know, I don't want to take up too much time with this, but I just want to flag and thank you for bringing this to the board, because it is really interesting work and something that I certainly hadn't been thinking about before. But you know, knowing what we do about the youth that tend to be served by these programs, I did just want to sort of flag, you know, engaging them in the process is going to be, you know, it's going to require a lot of thought. And I think that, you know, traditional ways of trying to reach out might not be sufficient. And so I just would urge, you know, and we can follow up, you know, and I can get some more information in other ways other than this meeting, but would just love to hear more about the plans for really intentionally seeking out youth who maybe haven't had, you know, the best experiences in programs like this in the past, and making sure that we are getting voices from a variety of different youth that have a variety of different experiences with programs.
Yes. Well said.
Great.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
We look forward to following along the journey here of your next steps. And this really is not only for you all, but for the agencies you work with, for the people in the field, for the youth that are being served. There's an opportunity in front of everyone here to have a voice by what you laid out, Andrew. And so I would just encourage people to participate in that process so that we get it right. I mean, the commissioner and I were talking earlier about a lot of these things need to live in continuous improvement, right? They can't wait 20 years to get done, because the world is changing fast, the needs are changing fast, the research is changing fast. And so this is really a great opportunity in this space with your team to really have an impact. So thank you for your leadership.
you.
And I think we'll take while we switch gears here, I think we'll take about a 5-minute break. Thanks. Turn it over to the commissioner for our next agenda item related to the child care financial assistance reimbursement rates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to welcome Amy Checkway, who's our Senior Associate Commissioner for Research and Policy, and Greg Norfleet, who's our Chief Operating Officer. And the three of us are going to pick up a little bit on last month's conversation about child care financial assistance, cost, and rates. We'll remind you all where we've been, as usual, and then share a little bit of new information and talk a little bit about sort of the FY24 strategy we hope to be able to bring back to you in terms of moving through this rate journey. Yeah. So Amy, am I turning it over to you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, as the commissioner just mentioned, we're providing sort of a brief update on our rates and also discussing some next steps and potential strategic directions for our rate structure moving forward. I'm happy to be here again.
Yes, and I should probably just start by saying that since we last met, we've had communication from our federal oversight agency that's made a change to sort of what we had expected or talked about last fall. So wanted to walk through that information with you again, sort of starting just with a reminder on the background where we've been over the last year in terms of rates and what the current status is. And
yes, exactly.
Great.
So the first part is a bit of a review, but I think it's helpful. It's actually helpful sometimes for myself to ground myself, but also for those who are listening. So as we've been talking about, just as context, states are required by the Federal Child Care Development Block Grant to conduct either a valid and reliable child care market rate survey or use an approved alternative methodology for really getting data and submitting findings on child care rates and or costs every 3 years as part of their state plan. And again, as we've been talking about, the goal behind this requirement is really to regularly assess and understand family access to care. The findings from either market rate survey or using another methodology are used to inform rate setting. So just to ground us in this conversation. And as you know, and as we talked about last month as well, this fiscal year, EEC conducted or oversaw really a market rate survey and a preliminary cost analysis in 2022, and these findings were incorporated into our amended what's called a CCDF state plan. So that's for the federal government. The board, you all, approved adjustments to rates this fall, and on top of this, and really what was the focus of last month's meeting was the much more in-depth cost analysis that was presented by our external research partner. And that team, as you know, is in the process of finalizing its report and cost models that then the agency can use moving forward by the end of this fiscal year. And again, the purpose of this work is really to gain insight into both key aspects of the system, both our current market rates and our costs. And if you could go to the next slide, Greg, thank you. So we just wanted to recap really briefly, again, what was presented to the board in September from the 2022 market rate survey in terms of the findings by our research partner. And as you may recall, these findings showed that Massachusetts subsidy rates were below the 50th percentile for most regions, most age groups, and most provider types. Our rates range quite a bit in terms of the percentile of the market rate from very low for certain provider types in certain regions to above the 50th percentile for some age groups in some regions. As you know, the key federal benchmark that has been in place for some time is the 75th percentile of the market rate, although this is not required at this time of states, and about 15 to 20 states nationally are currently able to reach this threshold. The board considered these findings and supported both generous targeted rate increases and across-the-board increases in November of last year. And there was real focus on making sure that all rates met or exceeded at least the 30th percentile at that time as part of the targeted increase, again, along with the across-the-board increase. So Greg's going to review some of the findings really quick.
Yeah, so after the fall, there was a historic the board issued a historic rate increase where this was our current state starting in 2022. You'll see anything in yellow is below the 25th percentile, anything in bold is under the 50th percentile. There's 18 rates that are below the 25th percentile and 38 that were below the 50th percentile. At the time, we didn't have guidance from OCC on what the threshold was going to be, so we pushed for the 30th percentile to get everyone above that level. As Amy and the Commissioner had mentioned, we did hear back from them, and the threshold is actually now the 50th percentile. But the board's vote did set us up very well. Where this is our current state, including the quality add-on. We now have no rates below the 25th percentile, and we only have 18 that are below the 50th percentile. And with existing line items, or with proposed line items in the budget, we're confident that we'll be able to get above that threshold in time.
So, as Greg mentioned, at the time that the board struggled over and sent us back, and we came back with what our strategy was going to be, it was an $80 million supported by the legislature, which was really an unprecedented opportunity to increase rates. And at the time, we wanted to make sure we lifted all the rates, but we were anticipating that the federal government, we submit the market rate survey, they look at our rates, and then they come back and say whether they're good enough or not. And as those of you who were here at the time, and for those of you who weren't, we were anticipating that the federal government would come back and say, your rates are too low. And so indeed, last week we received a preliminary notice of noncompliance that our rates still remain too low, and that our new threshold that they'd like to see us get to, in fact, required across all states, is the 50th percentile. So as Greg mentioned, we have about 18 rates that are still below the 50th percentile. The 80 million got us really close in a number of areas, but there's still some regions and age groups that are below that 50th percentile threshold. I do want to say that the federal government is acting in a very supportive role with us. They are interested in seeing us come into compliance. And as Amy mentioned, there are probably about 15 states in a similar situation to Massachusetts still, where they have room to go in terms of at least getting up to the 50th percentile across all their age groups and regions. So, we are in the midst of so we are interested in coming into compliance, but it all comes in the context of the conversation we've been having about recognizing the cost of care, not just the price of care. So the market rate survey, because we have not yet done our alternative methodology, is still completely locked in on price. And what we know from the cost study information that we saw last month and have been discussing over the last several months is that the disparity in prices, particularly between Eastern and Western Mass, yes, it costs more to do business in Eastern Mass, but the cost data shows us that the disparity that we see in the rates is not warranted. So we need to be able to both meet compliance with the federal government's requirements around the 50th percentile, but also use the cost data to inform what we should do going forward. So we are in the midst of the budget process. So as you know, the governor's budget included $20 million for a rate increase. The House budget included $90 million for a rate increase, and the Senate Ways and Means budget was just released, I think, about an hour ago. So we're waiting to see what ends up in the final Senate budget, and then likely there'll be a conferenceable set of information. So we don't have all the information right now to tell you exactly what our strategy is going to be and what the timeline would be. I will say our federal partners recognize all the work the state has been doing. We are not surprised by their finding of noncompliance. They know we've been working on an alternative methodology and that we implemented a big rate increase next year. So as I said, they are not really interested in having a noncompliance finding go on, but to work with us over however long it might take us to get into compliance. They'd like it to be sooner. So what we wanted to just share with you briefly today is sort of how we are thinking about what might be a rate strategy. Sorry, Carolyn.
That's okay. First of all, I don't think this is unexpected. Like you said, we had this discussion last year, and we were concerned about going to 30 was not going to be enough, right? So we were right. Okay, let's stop there. But I do question the federal government saying, oh, now we're going to 50 and you're out of compliance. It's like, so where's the grace period to get into compliance? So before you just say, okay, we just changed it and you're out of compliance. That doesn't seem logical to me, because if they're gonna raise it to say 50 percentile is now mandated, there should also be, and you have, I don't know, 6 months, a year, whatever, to get there. It's a little bit awkward that they just changed it, and along with it comes a finding of noncompliance.
I mean, they've indicated that they are willing to work with us, and I said it may take us a year or two to come into compliance, and they understood that. And
Okay.
again, I think what they're looking for is progress by the state. So I think you're right. If they turned around and said, and you need to find the money to do that tomorrow, you know, we'd be in a very difficult situation. But they've indicated they want to work with us. They'd like to see progress towards compliance, good faith efforts. They recognize the work we've been doing on alternative methodology. There's at least 2 other states that have an alternative methodology. They do not have a finding of noncompliance. So, you know, the timing for us is sort of like we're on the journey, and we got this marker in the middle of the journey, but they recognize that with us. And I think what we'd really like to see, and as I said, the budget is still up in the air, and so we won't know for several months what the final, we do anticipate there will be funding for a rate increase, because there's some in each of the versions of the budget right now. We don't know how much that will be, but regardless, I think our strategy would be to work towards compliance. And you know, the market rate is an important measure of access to the market and the places that families live and work. And also to use the cost information to bring up the lowest rates in areas where we can really see that the cost of care is much more consistent than the price is showing in the market rate. So we would absolutely want to make sure that whatever we implement in terms of a rate increase does both things in FY24. So we're bringing this information to you to let you know new information from the federal government around noncompliance, not unexpected. But that it comes at a time when we have enough information from the cost study to say that we need a combined strategy for next year. And we hope we'll also be able to pick up on some of the other really important recommendations from the Center for Early Learning Equity Funding, CELFE, funding equity, around the rate structure itself. So you saw we have about 65 rates. We probably don't need 65 rates. We have 6 regions. We might not need 6 regions. So we're hoping that our strategy overall during 24 continues down the path of compliance with federal requirements, using the cost study to make sure there's greater equity across regions and across age groups and types of care, less disparity at least. And also simplifying the rate structure in any way that we can, aligning with our own licensing regions, aligning with key economic indicators. And we are this summer going to be submitting to the federal government our proposal to do an alternative methodology. So I hope this will be the last time that we're in a cycle where we're looking exclusively at market rates. So by the time the next cycle comes around, we should hopefully, if approved, be fully into an alternative methodology, which will allow us to really lean into cost information to inform kind of the rate setting and the rate structure. Likely continued along with markets and with the market rate study, but we think we need both information to really create kind of a rational structure that can be supportive. And finally, you know, we've been saying all along, and the CELFE recommendations, which we included in the appendix, have said rates alone, tuition alone, whether they're paid for by us or by families, is not going to get us to a stable, equitable early education and care system. Tuition and what we're subsidizing in terms of families is a really critical piece of the puzzle, and a really critical piece of sort of stability for programs and staff salaries, but it's not alone going to create that kind of financing structure that can really support that equitable access for families. So we're going to continue to be looking at C3 and understanding what the impact of that is and operational grants going forward. So new piece of information from the federal government, but doesn't really change our overall strategy in terms of how we're thinking about reforming the rate structure, using the cost information to inform it, and continuing to understand the role that the essential role that operational grants will continue to play in terms of programs financing. Okay, I'll stop there and see what I leave out, guys.
I think
Yeah.
you said this, but I was just looking at the slide, just that we are assessing the fiscal impact of the new threshold, so.
Right, so we still need a little bit of information about what's in the budget and to look at the current, what the impact of that 50th percentile is, to understand, what we would be able to do in FY '24, what we might need to spread out over a couple years.
Any questions, comments from the board? More?
First, okay, so this is a very complicated bridge year. It's kind of how I'm understanding it, FY '24. And I'm thinking about the voices of those that we heard from in Region 1 in the western side of the state back in when that helped us to understand that we should be looking at cost, not price, and that there is wide inequity across our regions. So now this federal guidance is putting some pressure on kind of going against the pain they're feeling. And we feel their pain, and we feel the federal government's expectations of us. So I'm sort of just wrapping my head around. So in some ways, if we get a low amount of increased funding for next year, like the more we can get for next year's budget, the better we can resolve the tension that is going to probably emerge between doing right by those that feel more marginalized by this process across our regions and by the federal government.
Yes.
Okay, did I get that right?
I think so.
trying to
I mean,
wrap my head
I
around
think
the
optimistically.
tension that's going to.
Yeah, there is,
be a
I
part
mean,
of
there's
this.
a reconciliation, I think, that has to happen here once the budget process is done, but hopefully, I'll just speak for myself in this chair, is that we're in a both-and scenario
Yeah.
versus an either-or.
With the sufficient amount of additional money that we are hoping and expecting is going to happen thanks to, the House and the Senate.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the market survey is also an important measure of access for families, right? So what it tells us is how much of the market a family has access to. What we know is that alone is not enough to tell us what the experience of programs are. And so the cost data, so we know, moving up to the 50th percentile, which would mean families technically could buy into half of the market in the communities in which they're living and working. So an important measure. But what the cost data shows us is that the variation and the disparity between the cost and price is just not warranted. And that the programs that we heard from that create this tension, that in order for them to be able to meet even coming closer to the cost of care, we need to be able to raise those rates. So regardless of, I think the agency is really committed regardless of the level of funding, and we hope we'll have enough to do all things, come into compliance and really address some of the equity issues. But I think the agency's committed to doing both. Even if it takes us some time to get into compliance at the federal level, it's essential that we use both sets of information around our rate strategy for next year.
And I would just add, I mean, I appreciate the leadership of the team here, and Commissioner, your leadership on this. Like, there is just the fact that we are aware of that tension, right? That we know that tension exists, and that it is part of the calculation and strategy in which you all are bringing to this work, I think is just critically important as we figure out in this, I like that, this bridge year, how to reconcile this so that we're meeting the needs of regions across the Commonwealth. And so appreciate that leadership and just that, having that perspective at the table as we do that work.
It may be bridge years too.
Yeah.
It may be a couple of.
Okay, wait, actually, can
Yeah,
you,
sure.
so what do you mean by that? Because I guess I was gonna ask you, when can we use the alternative methodology as the driving force? And so I thought I heard you say FY '25, or maybe I interpreted wrong.
So, this is the first time we will have gone through this process, so with that caveat, I think the hope is we could submit a proposal to be reviewed by the Office of Child Care this summer. And once they have hopefully approved our methodology, we could move forward at that point with the next round of research or data collection, potentially as soon as later this calendar year to then use for the future. We obviously have a lot of information that, from this recent round as well, that
So
that can
it's a
inform.
two-step process.
Exactly.
We have to ask the federal government for permission to use an alternative methodology. The assumption for every state is a market rate survey unless you propose, we're gonna use an alternative methodology. So there's 2 states that have been approved and are using, 3 that are using, are you counting DC as a state?
I am actually. DC, Virginia, and New
yeah.
Mexico.
Sorry, say that again.
DC, New Mexico, and Virginia.
So it's a 2-step process. First, we propose.
Soon to be Massachusetts.
And soon to be Massachusetts. We would anticipate, we would submit this summer to be approved, to use the alternative methodology. And then we would use that methodology to collect information for the next round, which would be for 2020,
It would
during
inform
2025.
our next 3-year state plan, but we could start the work soon. Well, we will start the work beforehand.
But the good news is the cost data we have is in-depth enough for us to use, we don't have to wait for the next round to begin to reform the structure based on what we know about cost and the difference between the cost and price. But what's good about it is that when we come to the next round, we won't only be held accountable for the market prices, which is what's happening now. So this is.
It could be a couple years. That's why you said bridges.
That's why I said
Bridge
bridges.
years.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Other,
So are external consultants helping us figure this out, alternative methodology?
So we would need to engage an external partner to move forward with the alternative methodology, once it's approved. I believe
we're capable of making
we are in
the
a position to
proposal,
do the proposal, correct?
but we would need an external party to conduct it.
Yeah.
Which would be an additional scope of work that would have to, correct. Yep.
Other questions or thoughts for us as we
Thank you, I just say thank you.
we stand on the bridge?
I mean, I think, obviously, the next couple of weeks through the budget process will help inform some of this as we go forward. So I would imagine this is the first of many conversations over the next couple of months as we look at this work. But, appreciative of all that you all are putting into this to make sure that we're delivering for each end of the state in an equitable way as best we can, so.
And the south, too.
I said each end,
Oh,
right?
each
Of
end.
an all,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
and it's north, east, south, and west. Yeah, I mean, I think, as George and I talked about, I think what, this board meeting, 2 big important topics that we're gonna continue to be discussing over the course of the next year. So, no action for the board to take today, but coming soon will be some level of engagement and action by the board.
It's nice when you're not caught off guard by a finding like that, right? Like that it is part of this journey, and not something that I think people are aware of, but actually might be a tool to help continue this, to push on this. And so I appreciate the work.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Greg and Amy. Just as we conclude the meeting today, just want to thank again the residential and placement licensing team for joining us today. I had a chance to just thank them during the break and really applaud them for the leadership they do. And I did underscore it. It strikes me the breadth of oversight that this department has that most people may not see on a daily basis. And so, Commissioner, thank you for kind of putting this together and the panel together so that we understand the oversight that we have in support of the work that you are doing. And so thank you for that. I also just want to thank the team at EEC for, I've been in these roles. These meetings don't just happen. There's a lot of work that goes in to get us to this table, and just want to thank the team at EEC who works really hard days and weeks before these meetings happen to ensure that they go smoothly. And so want to just, before we leave today, just want to make sure to say thank you on behalf of the board to all of them. And so can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Carolyn, second. I'll call the roll. Secretary Tutwiler.
Yes.
Maura Siegel.
Yes.
Georgia Tanasoff.
Yes.
Linda Sager.
Yes.
Maria Mueller.
Yes.
Carolyn King.
Yes.
Jamela Lee. Nikki Ruiz.
Yes.
And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.